9 words that Jesus taught his disciples to overcome fear and draw closer to God. Fear has a strange way of making a person feel close to everyone and distant from God at the same time. You can pray every day, go through your routines, smile in front of people, and still carry a silent weight inside your chest that nobody truly sees. And the hardest part is that many believers think this means their faith is weak. But the disciples of Jesus felt that same hidden fear too. They walked beside him, heard his voice with their own ears, watched miracles happen in front of their eyes, and even then, fear still entered their hearts in moments they never expected. That is why this message matters so deeply. Because today you are going to understand the 9 words Jesus taught his disciples to overcome fear and draw closer to God. Not as a motivational phrase, not as a religious slogan repeated without meaning, but as living truth spoken directly into anxious hearts, confused minds, exhausted souls, and people who secretly wonder why they still feel afraid, even while trying to trust God. There are people listening right now who are tired of carrying battles they cannot explain. Some are afraid of losing someone they love. Some are afraid of the future. Some are terrified that God has become distant because their prayers feel unanswered. Others are afraid of failing spiritually, afraid that they are disappointing God because they cannot silence the anxiety inside their own minds. But Jesus never spoke to fearful people with condemnation. He spoke to them with understanding. And maybe that is what your heart needs most today, because fear does not always appear as panic. Sometimes fear sounds like overthinking every decision. Sometimes it sounds like emotional exhaustion. Sometimes it appears as control, sleepless nights, irritation, silence during prayer, or the constant feeling that something bad is about to happen even when life seems calm on the outside. And slowly, without realizing it, fear begins to change the way you see God. You still believe in him, but you stop feeling near to him. You still pray, but something feels blocked inside. You still read scripture, but your heart feels heavy instead of alive. Have you ever wondered why that happens? Why fear can quietly pull the soul away from peace even when someone genuinely loves God? That is exactly where the disciples found themselves more than once. The Bible shows moments where they were terrified, confused, uncertain, emotionally unstable, and unable to understand what Jesus was doing. Yet instead of pushing them away, Jesus moved closer to them in those moments. He addressed the fear beneath their words. He saw the anxiety they were trying to hide. He understood the emotional storm before they even spoke about it openly. And the 9 words he taught them were not only meant for them, they were meant for every person who would one day feel overwhelmed by life and wonder if peace with God was still possible. That includes the person listening right now, especially the person who feels spiritually tired, especially the person who keeps fighting thoughts they never talk about, especially the person who misses feeling connected to God the way they once did. Because what Jesus offered his disciples was not temporary emotional relief. He offered something deeper, something stable enough to survive uncertainty, silence, fear, waiting, and even moments where life made no sense at all. And before this message ends, you're going to understand why those words carried so much power then, and why they still have the ability to calm a fearful heart today. But first, you need to understand something most people never notice about the disciples themselves. Their greatest fears were not always external. Sometimes their deepest fear was what was happening inside them. Type 1 to write topic 1, or type the changes you want to make to the introduction. Chapter 1. The disciples were not afraid only of storms, persecution, or danger. Some of their deepest fears were invisible. They were afraid of misunderstanding God, afraid of failing after being chosen, afraid that one day Jesus would ask something from them they were not emotionally strong enough to give. And if we are honest, that fear still lives inside many believers today. There are people listening right now who are exhausted from pretending they are spiritually okay. They know how to quote scripture. They know how to encourage others. They know how to keep moving forward in public. But privately, they feel unstable inside. Questions keep repeating in their minds late at night. What if my faith is weaker than I thought? What if I disappoint God again? What if I never overcome this fear? The disciples carried fears like that too. Peter was bold in front of crowds, but unstable inside pressure. Thomas struggled with uncertainty he could not silence. The others constantly worried about survival, rejection, and losing control over situations they did not understand. Following Jesus did not instantly remove their human fears. It exposed them. And maybe that is why some people become discouraged after giving their lives to God. They expected faith to erase every internal battle immediately. But instead, hidden emotions begin rising to the surface. Anxiety becomes visible, doubts become louder, emotional weakness becomes harder to hide, but that does not mean God abandoned you. Sometimes Jesus allows fear to surface because he wants to heal something deeper than behavior. He wants to reach the hidden places inside the heart that performance can never fix. This is why Jesus never built his disciples through shame. He built them through truth. There is a powerful moment in Mark chapter 4 where the disciples are trapped in the middle of a violent storm while Jesus sleeps in the boat. The waves are crashing. Water is entering the boat. Fear takes over completely. And what makes this moment so important is not only the storm outside them, but the conclusion fear created inside their minds. They wake Jesus and ask, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" Notice what fear did. It changed the way they interpreted the presence of Jesus. A few moments earlier, they trusted him enough to enter the boat. But under pressure, fear made them question his care, his attention, and even his love for them. Fear still does that today. A person can love God deeply and still begin wondering where he is when life becomes painful or uncertain. And most people never say it out loud because they feel guilty for feeling that way. But hidden fear creates hidden distance. You continue praying, but your heart becomes defensive. You continue worshiping, but inwardly you are exhausted. You continue believing, but part of you is afraid to trust fully because you do not want to be hurt, disappointed, or left waiting again. And this is where many believers become emotionally divided inside themselves. One part still wants God. Another part is quietly protecting itself from pain. Have you noticed how exhausting that becomes over time? Trying to trust God while fear constantly whispers worst-case scenarios into your mind. Trying to feel peace while your thoughts never truly rest. Trying to draw closer to God while anxiety keeps convincing you to stay emotionally guarded. The disciples lived inside that tension too. And Jesus knew it before they fully understood it themselves. That is what makes his words so powerful later. He was not speaking to perfect men with unshakable faith. He was speaking to ordinary human beings carrying invisible emotional burdens, men who loved God and still struggled internally, men who wanted courage but kept feeling fear rise inside them again and again. And maybe this changes the way you see yourself today, because your fear is not proof that you are failing God. Sometimes fear simply reveals how deeply you need him. The real danger is not feeling fear. The real danger is allowing fear to become the loudest voice guiding your life. And this is exactly what Jesus began teaching his disciples to overcome, not by pretending fear did not exist, but by learning how to stay close to God even while fear was present. Because there is a kind of closeness with God that only develops when a person stops hiding what is truly happening inside their soul. One of the hardest moments in a believer's life is not suffering itself. It is when suffering happens while God feels silent, because pain becomes heavier when there is no immediate explanation attached to it. The disciples experienced this more often than people realize. There were moments where Jesus answered quickly, performed miracles openly, and spoke with clarity. But there were also moments where he allowed confusion to remain for a while. Moments where his disciples could not understand what he was doing, where he was leading them, or why he seemed calm while they felt overwhelmed internally. And silence has a dangerous effect on the human heart when fear is already present. It creates room for assumptions. That is why many people slowly become spiritually distant without even noticing when it started. Not because they stopped loving God, but because they stopped understanding what he was doing in their lives. A prayer remained unanswered. A season became longer than expected. A door closed unexpectedly. An emotional battle did not disappear after months of asking God for help. And little by little, the silence begins creating emotional fatigue. At first, the person keeps praying with confidence. Then they begin praying with uncertainty. After that, they pray with frustration. Eventually, some people continue praying outwardly while inwardly expecting nothing to change anymore. Have you ever noticed how dangerous disappointment becomes when it stays hidden inside the soul? Because disappointment rarely announces itself loudly, it quietly changes expectations. It changes how a person listens to God. It changes how they approach prayer. It changes how vulnerable they are willing to become with Him again. And this is exactly why fear grows faster when God feels silent. Not because God abandoned the person, but because fear begins interpreting the silence before faith has the chance to. The disciples faced this emotional tension during moments where Jesus spoke in ways they could not fully understand yet. In John chapter 14, Jesus begins preparing them for his departure. But instead of immediately understanding the spiritual meaning behind his words, the disciples became troubled internally, their minds focused on loss, uncertainty, and confusion, and Jesus noticed it immediately. Before they even explained everything they were feeling, he responded directly to the condition of their hearts. "Let not your heart be troubled." Those words were not random encouragement. Jesus was addressing the emotional atmosphere growing inside them. Because troubled hearts struggle to stay spiritually close. Fear creates noise inside the mind. And when the mind becomes noisy, the soul begins losing sensitivity to peace, trust, and spiritual clarity. That is why some people no longer know how to rest emotionally, even during quiet moments. Their bodies are sitting still, but their thoughts continue running endlessly. They think about problems before they happen. They replay conversations repeatedly. They imagine losses that have not occurred. They prepare emotionally for disasters that may never come. Fear convinces people that constant worry is necessary for protection. But slowly, that fear steals intimacy with God. Because intimacy requires trust, and trust becomes difficult when the heart expects disappointment. This is why many believers feel spiritually exhausted today, not because they stopped believing in God, but because internally they became tired of carrying uncertainty, tired of waiting, tired of trying to stay strong, tired of fighting thoughts that never seem to fully disappear. And maybe this is where you are right now. Still loving God, still trying, still praying, but emotionally worn down from carrying silent fears nobody fully sees. If that is true, there is something important you need to understand. Jesus never rebuked his disciples for being emotionally overwhelmed. He taught them how to remain near to him while they were overwhelmed. That changes everything, because many people think closeness with God only happens after fear disappears. But the disciples learned something different. Some of their deepest moments with Jesus happened while they were confused, afraid, emotionally unstable, and uncertain about the future. Which means your fear does not automatically separate you from God. But hiding inside fear without bringing it honestly before him slowly creates distance. And this raises an important question. If Jesus understood the fears hidden inside his disciples before they even spoke them clearly, how exactly did he respond to those fears when he looked directly into their hearts? There is something deeply comforting about the way Jesus looked at people. He did not only hear words, he saw hearts. Before the disciples fully understood their own emotions, Jesus already knew what fear was doing inside them. He could see the tension behind their questions. He could see the uncertainty hidden beneath their silence. He could see when anxiety was slowly reshaping the way they viewed God, themselves, and the future. And what makes this so powerful is that Jesus never responded to fearful people the way fear responds to them. Fear accuses. Jesus understands. Fear rushes. Jesus speaks peace slowly. Fear says, "You are alone." Jesus says, "I am here." There is a moment in John chapter 6 that reveals this beautifully. The disciples are crossing the sea at night. Darkness surrounds them. Strong winds begin shaking the water. Jesus is not physically beside them in the boat, and fear starts taking control of their minds. Then suddenly they see someone walking on the water toward them, and instead of feeling relief, they become even more terrified. Because fear distorts perception, they were looking directly at Jesus and still interpreted his presence as danger. Do you realize how often that still happens today? There are moments where God is actually moving towards someone, but fear convinces them they are abandoned. There are seasons where God is preparing transformation, but fear whispers that everything is falling apart. There are prayers being answered in ways the person does not yet recognize, because anxiety has already trained their mind to expect loss instead of hope. And before the disciples could calm themselves down, Jesus spoke immediately. "It is I. Do not be afraid." Simple words, but spoken at exactly the right moment. Because Jesus understood something many people forget today. Fear grows fastest in isolation and confusion. The longer fear speaks without interruption, the stronger it becomes inside the human mind. That is why the voice a person listens to most during fearful seasons matters deeply. Some people only listen to their anxious thoughts. Others only listen to bad news, pressure, uncertainty, and internal criticism. And after a while, they no longer know how to recognize peace even when God is near. But Jesus always interrupted fear before fear completely consumed the hearts of his disciples. Not because they were emotionally strong, but because he was teaching them where true peace comes from. And this is important. Jesus did not always remove the storm immediately. Sometimes he first restored perspective, because a troubled heart cannot interpret reality clearly. Fear magnifies problems. Fear predicts disaster. Fear convinces a person that temporary seasons will last forever. Fear makes people believe they are spiritually abandoned when they are actually being spiritually refined. And maybe that explains what some people listening are experiencing right now. You still love God, but your thoughts feel heavy. You still want peace, but internally everything feels unstable. You still try to trust him, but your mind keeps imagining worst-case scenarios over and over again. And the exhausting part is not only the fear itself, it is the loneliness fear creates inside the mind, the feeling that nobody fully understands what is happening inside you. But Jesus understands it completely. He understood it in his disciples before they learned how to express it themselves, and he understands it in you too. This is why Jesus never approached fearful people with emotional distance. He moved toward them intentionally. He spoke directly into the chaos happening inside their hearts. He addressed fear before fear hardened into hopelessness. Because unaddressed fear slowly changes a person spiritually. At first, fear only affects emotions. Then it affects decisions. After that, it affects trust. Eventually, it begins affecting intimacy with God. A fearful heart starts avoiding deep surrender because surrender feels unsafe. A fearful mind keeps trying to control outcomes because uncertainty feels unbearable. And without realizing it, the person begins carrying faith externally while internally living in survival mode. But Jesus came to free his disciples from that prison, not through pressure, not through shame, not by demanding emotional perfection. He taught them something deeper. He taught them how to anchor their hearts somewhere stronger than fear itself. And the words he spoke next would become some of the most powerful words ever given to fearful human hearts. Words that were never meant to stay inside church walls. Words meant for ordinary people trying to survive emotionally difficult seasons without losing closeness with God. But most people have heard those words their entire lives without ever understanding the depth hidden inside them. Type 1 to write topic 4, or type the changes you want to make to topic 3. Chapter 4. The words Jesus spoke were not designed to sound impressive. They were designed to hold human hearts together during moments when fear threatened to pull them apart. And that is why many people miss their true power, because the world searches for complicated answers, but Jesus often spoke with disarming simplicity. The problem is that familiar verses can become invisible over time. People repeat them so often that they stop feeling the weight behind them. But the disciples did not hear these words as decoration. They heard them while carrying uncertainty, emotional exhaustion, confusion about the future, and fear they could not fully control. And in the middle of that emotional tension, Jesus said, "Do not let your hearts be troubled." 9 words, simple enough for a child to understand, deep enough to sustain a soul for a lifetime. Notice carefully what Jesus did not say. He did not say, "Pretend nothing hurts." He did not say, "Ignore your emotions." He did not say, "Real believers never struggle with fear." He spoke directly to the condition of the heart because he understood something humanity still struggles to understand today. Fear begins internally long before it appears externally. That is why 2 people can face the same situation while responding completely differently emotionally. One collapses inwardly, the other remains anchored. Not because one has an easier life, but because one heart has learned where to rest during uncertainty. And this is what Jesus was teaching his disciples. He was not merely teaching emotional control, he was teaching spiritual anchoring. Because troubled hearts drift easily. A troubled heart overthinks constantly. A troubled heart loses peace quickly. A troubled heart interprets silence as abandonment. A troubled heart searches for safety and control, people, outcomes, routines, or certainty, instead of learning how to rest in God's presence. And maybe that explains why some people feel spiritually tired all the time. Not because they stopped loving God, but because their hearts never truly rest anymore. Even during prayer, their minds continue running. Even during worship, anxiety keeps speaking internally. Even during moments meant for peace, fear quietly prepares them for disaster. And after enough time living that way, exhaustion becomes normal. But Jesus never intended for his disciples to live internally tormented while outwardly following him. That is why these words mattered so much. Do not let your hearts be troubled. This was not passive advice. It was an invitation to stop allowing fear to become the authority inside the soul. Because fear always wants control over interpretation. Fear interprets waiting as rejection. Fear interprets uncertainty as danger. Fear interprets silence as absence. Fear interprets delay as abandonment. And if fear becomes the loudest voice inside a person, eventually it shapes their entire spiritual life. Prayer changes, worship changes, relationships change, the ability to trust changes. Even the image they carry of God begins changing. Have you noticed how fearful seasons make people expect bad outcomes automatically? Some people no longer know how to anticipate peace. They only anticipate disappointment. And this is exactly why Jesus addressed the heart before circumstances changed. Because external peace means very little if internal chaos still controls the soul. The disciples needed more than situational comfort. They needed a foundation strong enough to survive uncertainty itself. And Jesus knew those 9 words would only become real inside them if they learned something deeper afterward, because he did not stop speaking there. Immediately after saying, "Do not let your hearts be troubled," Jesus revealed the foundation beneath those words. Trust in God. Trust also in me. That changes everything. Because Jesus was not asking his disciples to manufacture peace emotionally. He was teaching them where peace is born spiritually, and most people spend years searching for peace without ever addressing the place where true peace actually begins. Fear does not always remove God from a person's life. Sometimes it simply changes the way the person sees him, and that difference matters more than most people realize. Because when fear settles deeply inside the heart, it begins rewriting spiritual perception quietly. A believer may still pray, still read scripture, still attend church, and still carry love for God, yet inwardly they start relating to him differently. Not as a father who is near, but as someone distant, difficult to reach, or emotionally silent. And many people do not even notice when this shift begins happening. At first, they simply feel more anxious than usual. Then they begin over-analyzing everything. After that, every delay feels personal. Every hardship feels like punishment. Every unanswered prayer starts feeding hidden insecurity. And eventually, fear creates a distorted image of God inside the mind. Instead of seeing him as present, the person begins expecting abandonment. Instead of expecting guidance, they expect silence. Instead of resting in trust, they live preparing for disappointment. This is why fear becomes spiritually dangerous when left unaddressed, not because fear itself separates someone from God, but because fear slowly changes how the soul interprets God's actions. The disciples experienced this repeatedly. In Luke chapter 24, after the crucifixion, the disciples are overwhelmed emotionally. Everything they believed was collapsing in front of them. Confusion consumed them, grief consumed them, fear consumed them. And when Jesus appeared after the resurrection, their first reaction was not peace. It was terror. The Bible says they thought they were seeing a spirit. Think about that for a moment. The very presence they longed for became frightening because fear had already reshaped their emotional perception. And that still happens today. There are people praying for God to come near while simultaneously fearing what his silence means. People asking for peace while mentally rehearsing catastrophe every day. People wanting intimacy with God while emotionally protecting themselves from vulnerability because deep trust now feels dangerous. Fear creates contradiction inside the soul. Part of the heart moves toward God, another part pulls away defensively, and this internal division becomes exhausting over time because the human soul was never designed to survive constantly divided between faith and fear. That is why many people feel emotionally drained even when nothing dramatic is happening externally. Their minds never fully rest. Their thoughts remain alert constantly. Their hearts remain guarded constantly. Even joyful moments become interrupted by hidden anxiety. What if something goes wrong? What if this peace does not last? What if I lose what I love? What if God does not come through this time? Fear keeps creating future disasters inside the mind before life even arrives there. And slowly, the person stops experiencing God relationally. They begin relating to him through survival instincts instead of trust. Prayer becomes tension instead of intimacy. Waiting becomes panic instead of surrender. Faith becomes emotional pressure instead of resting confidence. But Jesus never wanted his disciples to live that way. That is why he consistently redirected their attention away from fear-driven interpretation. When Peter stepped out onto the water in Matthew chapter 14, something profound happened. As long as Peter focused on Jesus, he walked where fear should have drowned him. But the moment fear regained control of his attention, he began sinking. Notice carefully. The storm itself had not changed. The waves had not disappeared. The wind had not stopped. What changed was where Peter fixed his focus, and this is still the hidden battle happening inside many people today. Fear fights for attention, because whatever controls attention eventually shapes emotional reality. If fear controls attention long enough, peace starts feeling impossible. If fear controls attention long enough, God begins feeling distant even when he is near. If fear controls attention long enough, the soul loses sensitivity to hope. And maybe this explains why some people no longer recognize the presence of God the way they once did. Not because God moved away, but because fear became louder internally than trust. Yet even when Peter began sinking, Jesus immediately reached for him. That matters deeply, because Jesus did not wait for perfect faith before responding. He moved toward Peter while Peter was still struggling. And maybe that is what someone listening needs to hear right now. You do not need to become emotionally fearless before God moves closer to you. You do not need perfectly stable thoughts before Jesus reaches toward your heart. The disciples were still learning, still afraid, still inconsistent, still emotionally fragile at times. And Jesus continued walking beside them anyway, but eventually he needed to teach them the difference between merely carrying faith externally and truly living from faith internally. Because those are not the same thing at all. There is a difference between carrying faith and living from faith. And many believers spend years doing the first without ever fully experiencing the second. The disciples themselves lived inside that tension. They followed Jesus physically before they learned how to trust him internally. They listened to his teachings, witnessed miracles, and obeyed instructions outwardly, yet fear still controlled many of their emotional reactions. That is because proximity to Jesus is not automatically the same thing as surrender to Jesus. A person can know Scripture and still live internally terrified. A person can pray daily and still be emotionally controlled by anxiety. A person can believe in God sincerely while still living every day in survival mode. And survival mode changes the way people experience life. Instead of living with peace, they live trying to prevent disaster. Instead of resting emotionally, they stay mentally prepared for loss. Instead of trusting God deeply, they try controlling every outcome themselves because uncertainty feels unbearable. This is exhausting for the soul, because fear constantly demands management. It demands overthinking. It demands emotional vigilance. It demands endless preparation for situations that may never happen. And eventually, the heart becomes tired not only from life, but from carrying itself constantly. That is why Jesus did not merely teach his disciples to believe in him intellectually. He taught them how to rest in him relationally, and those are completely different things. In Matthew chapter 11, Jesus says, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." Notice what he offers: rest. Not pressure, not performance, not emotional pretending, rest. Because Jesus understood that fearful people are often deeply tired people. Tired from carrying emotional burdens alone, tired from trying to stay strong constantly, tired from wrestling internally with thoughts nobody else sees. Some people listening today are not only afraid, they are exhausted from being afraid. Exhausted from carrying tension in their minds every single day. Exhausted from trying to predict outcomes. Exhausted from feeling spiritually unstable whenever life becomes uncertain. And over time, that exhaustion starts affecting faith itself. Not because the person stops loving God, but because they no longer know how to rest emotionally inside his presence. That is the difference between carrying faith and living from faith. Carrying faith often becomes external behavior. Living from faith becomes internal surrender. The disciples struggled with this repeatedly. Even after miracles, fear returned. Even after witnessing God's power, anxiety returned. Even after hearing Jesus speak peace directly to them, moments of uncertainty still shook them emotionally. Why? Because transformation takes place deeper than information. A person can hear truth repeatedly and still struggle to trust it emotionally when fear has shaped their inner world for years. And maybe that is why some believers feel frustrated with themselves. They know verses about peace. They know verses about trust. They know verses about fear, but emotionally they still feel unstable. And secretly, they wonder what is wrong with them. But Jesus never treated his disciples like failures because they struggled emotionally. He patiently kept leading them toward deeper trust. Not instant perfection, deeper trust. That matters. Because many people pressure themselves to become emotionally fearless overnight. But Jesus often works differently. He teaches trust gradually through relationship, honesty, dependence, and repeated moments of surrender. And surrender feels difficult for fearful hearts. Because fear constantly says, if you stop controlling everything, something bad will happen. But the more a person tries controlling everything emotionally, the less peace they actually experience internally. That is why some people cannot rest even when circumstances improve. Because their peace was never built on God's presence. It was built on temporary control, and control is fragile. The disciples had to learn this slowly, especially Peter. Peter loved Jesus deeply, but he constantly swung between confidence and fear. One moment he was bold enough to step onto water, another moment he was sinking emotionally beneath the same waves. One moment he declared loyalty confidently. Another moment, fear caused him to deny Jesus publicly, yet Jesus never stopped loving him through those inconsistencies. That reveals something powerful. Jesus was not building perfect performers. He was forming surrendered hearts. And surrendered hearts are not people who never feel fear. They are people who keep returning honestly to Jesus even when fear appears again. That changes the entire spiritual journey. Because now closeness with God is no longer based on emotional perfection. It becomes based on trust developed inside vulnerability. And vulnerability is exactly what many fearful people spend their entire lives trying to avoid. Which is why Jesus next had to confront one of the deepest hidden burdens his disciples carried inside themselves. The exhausting belief that they always needed to appear strong. One of the quietest forms of suffering is the pressure to appear strong while falling apart internally, and many believers carry that pressure every single day. They believe they must always sound confident, always appear spiritually stable, always have the right answers, always remain emotionally controlled. So instead of bringing their real fears honestly before God, they begin hiding behind spiritual performance. The disciples struggled with this too, especially in front of each other. They wanted to appear loyal, courageous, faithful, and prepared. But beneath those outward appearances, fear was still alive inside them. Fear of failure, fear of weakness, fear of disappointing Jesus, fear of not becoming who they thought they were supposed to become. And Jesus saw all of it. What makes him different from so many voices in the world is that he never demanded emotional pretending from the people closest to him. When the disciples were confused, he addressed their confusion. When they were afraid, he addressed their fear. When they doubted, he addressed their doubt. He never healed people by forcing them to hide what was actually happening inside their hearts. Yet many people today live spiritually exhausted because they are constantly acting stronger than they truly feel. They say, "I'm fine," while internally they are overwhelmed. They pray polished prayers while secretly feeling numb. They encourage everyone else while feeling emotionally empty themselves. And eventually, carrying that mask becomes heavier than the original fear, because pretending drains the soul. There are people listening right now who no longer know how to be honest emotionally, even with God, not because they are rebellious, but because they became afraid that weakness might disappoint him. But Jesus never moved away from weak people. He moved toward them. In Luke chapter 22, Peter boldly tells Jesus that he is ready to go with him even to prison and death. Peter truly believes it in that moment. He wants to be strong. He wants to prove his loyalty. But Jesus already sees the fear Peter himself does not fully understand yet. And later that same night, fear overwhelms Peter so deeply that he denies even knowing Jesus 3 times. Think about how crushing that moment must have felt. The disciple who spoke with the most confidence suddenly collapses under pressure. And this is important because many people believe their worst spiritual moments disqualify them from closeness with God. But look carefully at Jesus. After Peter failed, Jesus did not humiliate him publicly. He did not abandon him emotionally. He did not define Peter forever by his weakest moment. Instead, after the resurrection, Jesus intentionally restores him. Why? Because Jesus understood that fear had broken Peter emotionally long before it broke him publicly. And maybe that is exactly what some people need to understand about themselves. Sometimes, emotional collapse does not begin in one dramatic moment. It begins slowly through years of hidden exhaustion, hidden pressure, hidden anxiety, hidden disappointment, and hidden fear. People carry wounds silently until eventually something inside them gives way. And afterward, shame arrives quickly. Shame says, "A real believer would not struggle like this." Shame says, "God must be disappointed in you." Shame says, "You are too unstable spiritually." But Jesus speaks differently. He never denied Peter's failure, but he also never denied Peter's future. That changes everything. Because many fearful people secretly believe their weakness makes them spiritually unusable. Yet throughout Scripture, Jesus consistently chose emotionally imperfect people and stayed near to them while transforming them gradually. Not through pressure, through relationship, and relationship requires honesty. This is why fear becomes more dangerous when hidden. Hidden fear isolates. Hidden fear creates emotional loneliness. Hidden fear convinces people they must suffer silently because nobody would understand what is happening inside them. But Jesus understands completely. He understood the disciples even when they misunderstood themselves. And perhaps the reason some people feel so spiritually tired is not only because they are afraid, it is because they are trying to carry fear alone while pretending they are not afraid at all. That burden becomes unbearable eventually, because the human soul was never designed to heal through pretending. It heals through truth, brought honestly into the presence of God. And the disciples were about to learn something else fear does very quietly when it remains hidden too long. It slowly isolates the heart from connection itself. Type 1 to write topic 8, or type the changes you want to make to topic 7. Chapter 8. Fear rarely isolates a person all at once. It happens slowly, quietly, almost invisibly. At first, someone simply becomes more emotionally tired. Then they begin withdrawing internally, little by little. Conversations become shorter. Prayer becomes less honest. Worship becomes mechanical. Vulnerability starts feeling dangerous. And eventually, the person feels surrounded by people while internally carrying everything alone. This is one of fear's most destructive effects. It convinces the soul that isolation is protection. The disciples experienced this more deeply than many people realize. Even while walking together physically, they often carried private fears silently inside themselves. Each one struggled internally with uncertainty, insecurity, and emotional confusion in different ways. Yet instead of expressing those fears openly, many moments revealed them competing, hiding weakness, or trying to appear stronger than they actually were, because fear makes honesty feel risky. What if people misunderstand me? What if they see how unstable I really feel? What if I admit I'm struggling and nothing changes? These thoughts still trap many believers today. Some people have not truly spoken honestly about their fears in years. Not to family, not to friends, not even fully to God. They keep functioning outwardly while inwardly feeling disconnected from everyone around them. And the dangerous part is that spiritual isolation does not always feel dramatic initially. Sometimes it simply feels like emotional numbness. A person keeps living normally, but their heart slowly becomes harder to reach. Joy feels distant. Peace feels temporary. Connection feels exhausting. Even moments with God begin feeling emotionally muted. And after enough time living this way, many people stop expecting intimacy entirely. They learn how to survive spiritually without truly feeling close to God anymore. But Jesus never called his disciples into isolated survival. He called them into relationship. This is why one of Satan's most effective strategies is not always obvious destruction. Sometimes it is silent disconnection, because isolated fear becomes louder. When people suffer alone, anxious thoughts multiply faster. There is no truth interrupting them, no honest surrender, no emotional release. Fear keeps echoing internally until it begins sounding like reality itself. That is why some people feel trapped inside their own minds. The fear has been speaking uninterrupted for too long. And maybe that explains why certain nights feel heavier than others. The silence becomes a room where every insecurity grows louder. Regrets return, uncertainty returns, questions return, and without realizing it, the person begins emotionally withdrawing not only from people, but from God himself. Not because they hate God, but because fear whispers that distance is safer than vulnerability. Yet Jesus consistently moved toward isolated hearts. One of the most powerful examples appears after the resurrection. The disciples are gathered behind locked doors in John chapter 20 because fear has consumed them completely. They are hiding, confused, emotionally shattered, unsure what comes next. And Jesus enters the room anyway. That matters deeply, because the disciples did not find peace first and then reconnect with Jesus. Jesus stepped into their fear before they recovered emotionally, and he still does that now. There are people listening who feel emotionally locked behind invisible doors, doors built from disappointment, anxiety, shame, exhaustion, trauma. Fear of being hurt again, fear of trusting again, fear of hoping again. But Jesus is not intimidated by locked hearts. He understands why they were built, and instead of condemning the disciples for hiding, the first thing he says is, "Peace be with you." Not pressure, not accusation, peace. Because fearful hearts do not heal through force. They heal through safe closeness. This is something many believers have forgotten. God is not asking you to perform your way back into intimacy with him. He is inviting you to stop hiding, to stop carrying fear silently, to stop believing that isolation protects the soul. Because isolation may protect vulnerability temporarily, but eventually it also blocks healing, connection, and peace. And the disciples were about to discover something life-changing through all of this. The moments they feared most would actually become the moments that taught them who Jesus truly was. The disciples did not fully understand the words of Jesus while the storms were happening. Only later did they realize what he had truly been teaching them. And that is often how spiritual transformation works. In the middle of fear, people usually ask, "How do I escape this?" But afterward, they begin realizing God was teaching them something deeper than escape itself. He was teaching them how to remain close to him inside uncertainty. That changes the entire meaning of peace, because most people believe peace means the absence of trouble. But the disciples discovered something different. Some of their deepest revelations about Jesus happened while life still felt unstable around them. Think about the storms they endured emotionally. They watched Jesus arrested. They watched him suffer. They watched hope appear shattered in front of their eyes. Everything they thought the future would become suddenly collapsed. And for a while, fear completely controlled them. But after the resurrection, something inside the disciples slowly changed. Not because life immediately became easy, not because danger disappeared, not because uncertainty vanished forever. What changed was their understanding of who Jesus truly was in the middle of fear. Before, they trusted him mostly when circumstances made sense. Afterward, they began learning how to trust him even when life felt confusing. That is spiritual maturity. Not becoming emotionless, not pretending fear no longer exists, but learning that the presence of Jesus remains steady even when emotions are unstable. And many people listening right now desperately need to hear this, because they keep waiting to feel completely fearless before believing God is near again. But the disciples themselves often felt afraid while still being deeply loved by Christ. This is one of the greatest misunderstandings many believers carry. They think peace is a feeling they must achieve, but biblical peace is first a presence before it becomes an emotion. The disciples learned this gradually, especially after seeing Jesus alive again. Suddenly, they realized fear had blinded them repeatedly. Moments they interpreted as abandonment were actually moments where Jesus was still guiding them. Moments they thought were the end became preparation for deeper understanding. And maybe your current season feels confusing for the same reason, not because God abandoned you, but because you cannot yet see what he is building through this struggle. Fear always wants immediate answers, but faith often grows slowly inside unanswered moments. That is difficult for human hearts, because nobody enjoys uncertainty, nobody enjoys waiting, nobody enjoys emotional stretching. Yet some of the deepest intimacy with God is formed precisely there. Not when life feels fully controlled, but when the soul slowly learns it can survive without control because God remains present. The disciples became different people after walking through fear with Jesus. Peter, once emotionally unstable, later stood with extraordinary courage. The same disciples who once hid behind locked doors eventually carried the gospel boldly across nations. What transformed them? Not personality changes, not emotional perfection. The nearness of Christ reshaped them over time. That is important because many people become discouraged by how long transformation takes. They think if fear still appears, they must not be growing spiritually. But growth is not the absence of struggle. Growth is what happens when fear no longer has the final authority over the heart. The disciples still experience difficult emotions later in life, but fear stopped ruling them the way it once had. And perhaps this is the shift Jesus wants to begin inside someone listening today. Not the complete disappearance of every anxious thought overnight, but a deeper awareness that fear no longer gets to define your relationship with God. Because when fear defines the relationship, everything feels unstable. But when Jesus defines the relationship, even painful seasons begin carrying hope again. And this leads to one of the most important truths the disciples eventually discovered. The peace Jesus offered was completely different from the kind of peace the world keeps searching for. The peace Jesus offered his disciples was not fragile. It was not dependent on perfect circumstances, predictable outcomes, or emotionally easy seasons. That is why it looks so different from the peace the world tries to create. Most people search for peace through control. If everything goes according to plan, they feel calm. If relationships feel stable, they feel secure. If finances improve, if health improves, if uncertainty disappears, then maybe they believe peace will finally arrive. But that kind of peace collapses the moment life becomes unpredictable again. And life always becomes unpredictable eventually. The disciples discovered this repeatedly. Every time they built emotional stability around circumstances alone, fear eventually returned. But Jesus kept pointing them somewhere deeper. In John chapter 14, after telling his disciples not to let their hearts be troubled, Jesus says something extraordinary. "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. Not as the world gives, do I give to you." That statement changes everything, because Jesus himself acknowledged there are different kinds of peace. The world's peace depends on favorable conditions. Christ's peace depends on his presence. The world says peace comes when problems disappear. Jesus says peace can remain even while storms continue. That is difficult for the human mind to understand because people naturally associate peace with comfort. But the disciples eventually learned that inner stability rooted in God is stronger than external instability around them. And maybe this is exactly what some people listening have been searching for without realizing it. Not temporary relief, not distraction, not emotional numbness, real peace. The kind that steadies the heart when answers are missing. The kind that holds the mind together during uncertainty. The kind that allows a person to breathe again internally even while life still feels unresolved. Because unresolved situations often frighten people more than suffering itself. The unknown creates anxiety. Waiting creates anxiety. Lack of control creates anxiety. And fear constantly whispers that peace is impossible until certainty arrives. But Jesus taught the opposite. He taught his disciples that peace begins where trust deepens, and trust becomes most visible during uncertainty. This is why some people remain internally unstable, even when life externally improves. They solved the circumstance, but never addressed the fear beneath it. So the mind simply searches for a new threat afterward. Have you noticed that? One problem ends, another fear appears, one prayer gets answered, another anxiety replaces it. Because fear is not satisfied through control. Fear always demands more control afterward. That is why Jesus never centered peace around circumstances. He centered peace around relationship with him. And this becomes deeply personal for many believers, because some have spent years trying to achieve peace instead of receiving it, trying to earn rest emotionally, trying to become spiritually perfect enough to feel calm, trying to force certainty into every area of life. But Jesus never said, "Create your own peace." He said, "My peace I give to you." A gift, not a reward for emotional strength, not a reward for flawless faith. A gift received through closeness and trust. The disciples slowly learned this after watching Jesus himself remain calm during situations that terrified everyone around him. During storms, chaos, betrayal, rejection, and suffering, Jesus carried an inner steadiness that could not be explained by circumstances alone. And the closer the disciples walked with him, the more they realized his peace came from complete trust in the Father's presence. That is why fear loses power when intimacy with God deepens. Not because problems disappear instantly, but because the soul no longer faces them alone. And perhaps that is the shift happening inside someone listening right now. Maybe for the first time, you are beginning to understand that peace is not the absence of fear. It is the presence of Jesus becoming stronger than fear. That changes the entire battle, because now the goal is no longer emotional perfection. The goal becomes remaining close to God, even when emotions still fluctuate. And strangely enough, many people discover something unexpected when they stop running from fear constantly. The very fear they thought was destroying them begins revealing what their soul truly needs most. Most people spend their lives treating fear like an enemy that only exists to destroy them. And sometimes fear truly does wound the heart deeply. But there are moments where fear also reveals something the soul has been hiding for a very long time. Need, dependence, exhaustion, hunger for closeness with God. The disciples slowly discovered this through their own struggles. Every moment where fear exposed their weakness also exposed how much they still relied on themselves emotionally. They wanted certainty, control, immediate understanding, emotional stability they could create with their own strength. But fear kept showing them the limits of human control. And perhaps that is why fearful seasons feel so uncomfortable, because they expose what we normally try very hard to hide. How fragile we really are, how little control we truly have, how deeply we long for peace, how desperately the human heart needs something stronger than itself to rest upon. Many people do not realize this, but some fears are actually symptoms of deeper spiritual thirst. A person afraid of losing everything may secretly be exhausted from carrying life alone. A person terrified about the future may deeply crave reassurance that God is still near. A person overwhelmed by anxiety may not simply need answers. They may need intimacy with God again. And fear has a strange way of uncovering these hidden places. That is why some people unexpectedly grow closer to God during painful seasons. Not because suffering itself is good, but because fear finally strips away the illusion that they can sustain themselves without Him. The disciples experienced this transformation repeatedly, especially after failing, especially after confusion, especially after discovering that human strength alone could not carry them through spiritual storms. Peter understood this deeply. The same man who once tried proving his strength eventually became a man who depended completely on Jesus. And that transformation did not happen through success alone. It happened through weakness exposed honestly before God. This is something many believers resist emotionally. They want God without vulnerability, peace without surrender, strength without dependence. But Jesus consistently led His disciples in the opposite direction, toward honesty, toward surrender, toward trust that survives even when emotional certainty disappears. And maybe this is why some people feel stuck spiritually right now, not because God stopped moving, but because fear has revealed an area of life they still have not fully surrendered, an area where they still believe control will protect them more than closeness with God. But control cannot heal the soul. Only God's presence can do that. Fear eventually exhausts people because it demands constant self-protection, constant emotional management, constant internal vigilance. The mind never rests. The heart never softens fully. The soul stays tense, waiting for the next threat. And after enough time living that way, people stop realizing how heavy their inner world has become. Until one day, exhaustion finally forces honesty. That moment matters deeply, because honesty before God is often where healing begins. Not polished prayers, not pretending, not spiritual performance, honesty. The disciples became transformed men not because they stopped being human, but because eventually they stopped hiding their humanity from Jesus. Thomas admitted his doubt. Peter broke openly after failure. The others admitted fear behind locked doors. And Jesus met them there every single time. That is important because some people listening still believe God moves away from weakness. But Scripture keeps revealing the opposite. Jesus moves toward weakness brought honestly before Him. And maybe your fear is not proof that God is distant. Maybe your fear is revealing how deeply your soul needs His presence again. Maybe the anxiety exhausting you is exposing how long you have tried carrying burdens without resting fully in Him. Maybe the emotional instability is uncovering places where your heart still longs for security that only God can truly provide. Fear cannot satisfy the soul. Control cannot satisfy the soul. Endless overthinking cannot satisfy the soul. Only closeness with God brings the kind of rest fear can never manufacture. And this is exactly where the disciples finally began understanding the deeper invitation hidden inside the words of Jesus all along. Because those 9 words were never simply about calming emotions. They were about leading fearful hearts back into trust, closeness, and rest in God Himself. The 9 words Jesus spoke to his disciples were never only about fear, they were about relationship. Do not let your hearts be troubled. At first, those words sound like comfort, but after walking through everything the disciples experienced, they become something deeper. They become an invitation to stop living as if fear has the final authority over the soul, an invitation to stop carrying life alone emotionally, an invitation to stop believing that peace depends on having every answer, every solution, or every outcome under control. Because by the end of their journey with Jesus, the disciples understood something they could not fully see at the beginning. The greatest miracle was not simply that storms calmed, it was that fearful hearts learned how to remain near to God even while storms existed. That changes everything, because life will still contain uncertainty sometimes. There will still be seasons that make no immediate sense. There will still be moments where prayers feel delayed, emotions feel heavy, and the future feels unclear. But the disciples discovered that fear no longer had to separate them from intimacy with God. And perhaps that is the real transformation happening inside someone listening right now. Maybe your fear brought you here. Maybe exhaustion brought you here. Maybe disappointment brought you here. Maybe you clicked on this message because part of your soul was quietly searching for reassurance that God had not walked away from you. And if that is true, listen carefully. Jesus never moved away from fearful people. He moved toward them. Toward Peter after failure. Toward Thomas after doubt. Toward the disciples hiding behind locked doors. Toward anxious hearts overwhelmed by uncertainty. Toward ordinary people struggling internally while trying to keep following him. And he still moves toward people that way now. That means your fear does not disqualify you from closeness with God. Your emotional exhaustion does not make you unreachable. Your anxious thoughts do not scare Jesus away. Your weakness does not cancel his presence. In fact, some of the deepest moments of intimacy with God begin exactly where pretending finally ends. The disciples spent so much time trying to understand how to become stronger, but eventually they discovered something greater. Peace was never born from becoming emotionally invincible. Peace was born from trusting the presence of Jesus more than the voice of fear. That is why these 9 words carried so much power, not because they removed every difficult emotion instantly, but because they redirected the heart back toward trust, back toward surrender, back toward closeness with God. And maybe for the first time in a long while, you can feel that happening inside you now. Not because every problem disappeared, but because something deeper is shifting. The pressure to carry everything alone is beginning to loosen. The fear that once felt overwhelming no longer feels like the only voice speaking inside your mind. And somewhere beneath the anxiety, beneath the exhaustion, beneath the uncertainty, peace is beginning to breathe again, quietly inside the soul. That is what Jesus wanted his disciples to discover all along. Not a life free from storms, a heart that remains anchored during them. And perhaps tonight, before you sleep, instead of asking God for every answer immediately, you simply need to remember this. You are not abandoned inside your fear. You are being invited closer through it. And once a person truly understands that, they never hear the words of Jesus the same way again, because suddenly those 9 words stop sounding like advice. They begin sounding like the voice of someone who deeply understands the human heart, someone still speaking peace into fearful souls today. And there is another message many people never notice hidden inside the teachings of Jesus about fear, trust, and surrender that changes the way they experience God completely after hearing it.